We want to take a look now at how the speech was received and the impact it might have. Jim Wallis is an evangelical writer for Sojourners magazine and author of The Great Awakening. Deborah Dickerson, a columnist for MotherJones.com, and Jeff Greenfield is our CBS News senior political correspondent. Jim Wallis, let me start with you. Obviously, Obama's association with Jeremiah Wright was creating problems for him. According to a new CBS poll, 30% of all registered voters said that Wright's statements made them view Obama less favorably. So did he do enough today to distance himself from some of Jeremiah Wright's more controversial comments?
Well, Katie, I hope every American listens to or reads this speech. He understands the anger of the past, the frustration of the present in the black church, and Jeremiah Wright was speaking out of that. The man's whole career was boiled down to 4 angry sound bites, and Obama distanced himself from that, but he said, we can do better. It's possible to change these things, and he offered his vision, and America should read it and make their own decisions.
And Deborah, in fact, he did talk a lot about the lingering anger in the African-American community as a result of past injustices, claiming the anger is real, it is powerful. Do you think that Jeremiah Wright speaks for many African-Americans in this country, even at his angriest?
I think even at his angriest, yes. I think Obama was brilliant in this speech and in so many ways, but he talked about the fact that that kind of anger, when it's allowed to get out of control, is obviously self-destructive, and it's also it's an insult to America. It talks about America as if there has been no progress, and that's why it's not useful. So you have to learn to understand when anger is hurting you, and when anger can be legitimate. As Jesse Jackson said, you can't tell a man who's hurting how to holler, but hollering doesn't really get you anywhere. And I think now that the discourse, the religious discourse, which has always been a refuge of this kind of rhetoric, is going to have to do some soul searching and say, okay, now that people are paying attention, are these the words that I really meant to use?
Jim Wallis, obviously Obama needs the support of white voters. Is this side of the black experience, though, even if it's not the most productive, but if in fact still exists, does it make too many white voters uncomfortable? Is it too off-putting for them?
Well, Deborah is right. The white elephant in the room here, you might say, I'm speaking as a white religious leader, is that many white Americans would be uncomfortable with what is said often in black churches. The black pulpit is a place of truth-telling about the experience of black people. Every week has to nurture the souls of people who feel beaten down and yet announce God's promise for the future. Barack understands that, and he is a new generation turning a page. He's saying we can't just be stuck in the past.
Jeff Greenfield, do you think this speech will put the Jeremiah Wright controversy behind him?
No. As a speech about race in America, it was a very effective, uncommonly frank speech. But the problem is what brought him to this point at this point in the campaign. It's very much like one line that can define somebody, particularly somebody who's not as well known. Back in the 1980 campaign, Ronald Reagan said some things that were very controversial and sometimes silly, but people felt they knew him. How does a guy who spends 20 years with somebody with some notions that seem very bizarre, like AIDS is a government conspiracy, what's he doing with that guy for 20 years? And I think for people who are looking at Obama as a new kind of guy, it sets up a kind of confusion. It's a question. Who is this guy really? And I don't think this speech, effective as it may be in other areas, ends that controversy for him.
Deborah, what about Jeff Greenfield's contention that there are still a lot of issues about his association with a guy for 20 years who was his spiritual mentor, who does say some pretty unconventional things? Do you think that will linger out there and cause people to really have some trepidation?
Yes, and the question is the significance of those trepidations. There's a sense that what happens in church stays in church, and I think it's a vestige of racism. Nobody took us seriously. Nobody cared what those colorful ministers were saying. Let's just hear the choir sing and move on. Now people are paying attention to what's said in those places, but there's no doubt in my mind that politicized ministers are going to be rereading their sermon notes. You're going to start seeing a lot of blog entries from people who go to church and who hear these sorts of things. I think black religiosity is now being taken seriously, and seriously means that these statements are going to be scrutinized.
Deborah Dickerson, Jim Wallis, and Jeff Greenfield, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Katie.